Is that something that you think is lacking in modern day Bermuda?
Very much so. Very much so. And also just family and community is lacking in a major way, and it's become a huge disadvantage. It was a strength of ours.
Now I'm gonna play devil's advocate, and as we say in the Caribbean, chuck fire. You belong to a group called the Imperial Group.
Mm-hmm.
You guys promote unity in the community. Mm-hmm. I'm suggesting to you that that's a fallacy.
Okay. Well, now when you have one narrative and all the energy is put into shutting down anyone who has any other thought or idea, now you really have a problem, because you're asking people to follow one train of thought, and there's no effort being made to include any other viewpoints. Challenges come all through life, and COVID or the pandemic is just another challenge. Now people could say, okay, this is huge, it's global scale. All right, but then life still has laws, there are principles, and there are guidelines, right? And the concerns I hear came from the fact that we seem to, not be adhering to fundamental principles.
First of all, Eugene, thanks for chatting with us here on the State of the Nation.
Yeah.
We know you as, for want of a better term, what they would call a cultural impresario to a certain extent. We've known you as a football coach. Mm-hmm. We've seen you as a politician. We've seen you as a champion for various causes affecting the less fortunate and speaking for those without a voice in this country. But who are you? Who is Eugene Dean? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, give thanks, Gary. And I guess for me, I'm just ultimately somebody who cares deeply for people and for my country. And it's interesting because I've had to come to terms with myself over time. Just growing as a young man, I would find myself presented with opportunities that could benefit me financially, and opportunities that could see me assist with helping to resolve community issues or meeting community needs. And in my study of myself, I would always find myself in the community. And I would even ask myself the question, why do you always put your kind of personal interests aside to assist others? And it's just always been who I am. And so I had to come to terms with that. I had to let go of a lot of things, in terms of social pressures of what you should be or what you should be doing. And, because, I'm supposed to have a new car and be, buying new houses and things of that nature. But instead, I'm working hard in the community, working with young people, initially around sports, as you said, and football, which has been a passion of mine all my life, and then into culture and the arts and entertainment and environment and things of that nature. So that's just who I am. And I've come to terms with that. And I think over time, the community has developed an appreciation for contributions that I've made. And I feel that that's my purpose, and this is how I show up to serve. So I give thanks that I've lived a life that I've been able to really pursue my passions and be in alignment with my true purpose.
Do you think that there was a cultural shift that perhaps would have forced you to adopt this approach that you've taken?
I would say that, yes. When I look at I have sisters. My sisters are older than me. They're in somewhat of a different generation. My younger sister's 11 years older than me. And I would observe my sisters, and I can see clearly the time that they were born in and what was important in that phase of life. They're all very well educated, got very good jobs, you know what I mean? They've done, my parents or our parents really proud in that regard. And I was somewhat, even though I did achieve a lot academically and achieved a lot in sports, I was somewhat rebellious towards, I guess, the norm.
Yes.
I didn't really take the normal pathways. And You know, you had Bob Marley's music out there. You know, you had Rasta emerging in the black community. You had all sorts of cultural groups forming, Hebrew Israelites, Nation of Islam, Ethiopian Orthodox. And, you know, I feel that black people post-slavery and segregation were doing a lot of introspection and finding themselves and finding alignment with different organizations and cultural groups. And so I feel that I was born into a time and a lot of that had matured, you know, so it was a lot easier for me. I knew at one point, like, you could get arrested in Bermuda for having locks, you know. I have partners who lived during that time. It wasn't like that for me. You know, I could walk in office buildings and banks with locks. You know, I can enter election with locks, you know, so it's a lot more accepted. So I say all that to say that even the somewhat rebellious positions that I was taking up, it was far more embraced. I remember coming in from college and I was in the trainee program at the damn Bank of Bermuda. And one of the first meetings I remember at that bank was women standing up and saying, you can't tell us how to have our hair. If I want to have my hair natural, that's what it is. That has nothing to do with the quality of my work in this job.
Their ability
You know what
to
I mean?
perform and do what's required of them.
Exactly. You know what I mean? So if I have locks, that's representation of me. That's not something, it's not like a part of my uniform.
But back then, as you put it, that was considered rebellious and going against the status quo.
Exactly. You know, but it had become, right, somewhat more acceptable for people to take up those positions. So I remember, like, when I first started at the bank, everybody wore suit and tie, and, you know, I was in the IT department, and very soon I was like, oh, well, we wear polo shirts now. So, you know, I was happy.
Didn't have to do this.
I was like, okay, I can get down with this. But what I'm saying is that these are some of the experiences I had younger. And then I would go to play football, and it would just be Rastas. They are outers. So after the games, we're just talking, you know, and it's like a lot of wisdom. And we're talking about culture, and we're talking about identity and things of that nature. And you're coming to terms with, like, who you are.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because clearly that has had a positive influence on you. Is that something that you think is lacking in modern day Bermuda?
Very much so. Very much so. And also just family and community is lacking in a major way, and it's become a huge disadvantage. It was a strength of ours, you know. And what's very interesting, right? You talk about shifts, right? My partners and I, we talk a lot about transitions. So if you think about a segregated Bermuda and how strong the black community was, segregated, right? And how many businesses were developed. You see what I mean? And how we had our own stores, because we had to build our own systems. We had no choice. There was no other option.
It's almost as if you're suggesting that segregation may not have been a good thing for the black community in Bermuda. Well, the dismantling of right. Segregation, rather.
We didn't transition well out of it. So it's transitions in life that are key. Even in sports, when you think about it, it's transition. How do you transition from attack to defense?
To defense, yes.
And if you don't transition, if you're attacking and you're not able to quickly transition into a defensive, right, mode, right, you could be getting scored against all you want. You could be controlling the game and still lose because of the transitions.
But one would have thought that desegregation would have meant equity. Clearly that didn't happen.
Well, the thing is, right, what happened is we lost sight of where our strength came from. Our strength came from family. Our strength came from community. Our strength came from solidarity, from working together. You know, when I think about my parents, our house was built by my father and his friends. And his friends' houses were built the same way, you know, because everybody will gather together and help. Now you have this concept of like a nuclear family. So everyone's isolated. So now I need to build a house. I'm going to either have the financial means, or I'm going to go get some financing or something like that. But it's my responsibility. It's not seen as like a collective aim, you know, to ensure that everyone's family is able to be secured with a home. You know what I mean? And these are the mindsets that came out of a time when we were segregated. No, it's not that I'm saying that we should
Go back to that.
go back to segregation. What I'm saying is that in desegregation, right, we lost sight of those things that brought us strength because we were so interested in the things that we didn't have access to, that we left the things that we already had. Now, should we have taken advantage of the new things whilst maintaining the things we already had, the picture could look very different. But where are our families now? Where are our communities? Where are the clubs? Where are the friendly societies? Where are the odd fellows?
When do you think, or at what point do you believe that sense of community collapsed or dissipated to lead us where we are now?
Well, see, it's complex, right? And these things happen over time. So it's not like it was like a single event. It's like the problems continue to get compounded little by little, and it gets more and more complicated and more complex. And if there's a lack of appreciation for how things happen, then you lack the tools to bring solutions. But how do you resolve something that you've yet to really understand? You know, and that's what's created these complexities. So we've come from the outside and said, well, let's fix this way, let's do that. But nobody's really talking about how we got there in the first place. I find very few conversations about things like this outside of the conversations that I have with my partners. So what I would say is that, right, a conversation I had with teachers probably about 7-8 years ago. It was the teachers conference just before school went in, right? I was invited to speak. And I talked about how we have a tendency of trying to make life easier for our children.
So is it Bermuda's wealth, when Bermuda became, as some people like to say, the second richest country in the world, or is that when the disconnect occurred? Do you think that the acquisition of wealth and the fact that Bermuda was considered such a place that held such wealth is where this thing started to come apart?
Well, what's possible is that it was the prioritization of attaining wealth that was prioritized over family, community,
Country.
and unity. Yeah, you see what I mean?
Yes.
Because we put more focus on tangible materials and lost sight of the intangible things that were really the glue
That held the
that
community
held
together.
the community and held families together. So I think it's that. It's what we were pursuing. See, when we didn't have the finances, then we held on tight to those values, those principles. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And it's in the pursuit of the materials that we've lost sight of those same things.
Gain the world and lost our soul.
Pretty much.
How do we
Pretty
fix that,
much.
though? How do we fix that? And whose responsibility is it to address that and right it?
Well, see, this is a very good point, right? We go back to the root, right? And what we like to think is that we can find someone, right, to make responsible for our collective challenges. So if it's the leader of the day, if it's the government of the day, why don't you guys fix these things? Man, in reality, like, you know, it was our individual decisions that led us to this position. So now it's going to require our individual decisions to get us back to that. We need more positive examples, but at the end of the day, it's going to be from decisions that we make as people here that are going to shift things. And we need to find ways to reclaim, right, these things that we held so dearly before. Because we don't know our neighbors, for example. Families are estranged. Most families are split. I mean, you have terms like baby mama, baby daddy, and things of that nature. Like these are new, relatively new terms. These things didn't exist before, you know. all the way down to, we don't garden together as families. We don't have community gardens or things of that nature. We've given away a lot of the things that gave us strength. We've given away a lot of the things that gave us independence. Even like if you think about water nowadays, right? I remember being at the United Nations with some youth groups years ago, and people were like amazed. Oh, you catch water on your roof? Wow, that's brilliant. Brilliant concept. But what are we doing now? We just say, well, we just get Watlington water. And that's not to knock Watlington for a business venture, because there's a place for all those things, but this is just an example of how we've come from independence and chosen to become dependent and reliant on others. You see what I mean? And now we complain about food prices because nobody has time to garden anymore, right? Because we're so busy making money to buy groceries.
You, as a member of the Imperial Group, and I want to ask you about the Imperial Group as you go along, that is one of the things that you have long advocated for: food security, returning to your roots, for want of a better term. And when I say roots, I mean Bermudian roots.
Right.
What we did in the past, a lot of what you spoke about. Any headway in that regard? You think people are buying into that now? As you mentioned, prices are so high that we're wondering, well, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for that? When 50 years ago, Bermuda had food security because of the very thing that you alluded to, having family gardens, having community gardens.
Right, yeah. Well, we tend to do things when we have to, right? And, Bob Marley says sometimes total destruction is the only solution. So now that things have gotten so bad, people are returning to that. Obviously you have the forerunners, people who have embarked on these things long before others. But slowly but surely, people, even if people are just planting herbs, or just have a little, things in the kitchen, or just a small little box garden outside, but the transition is happening. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine in Somerset, and he said, like, people have these yards, and they have all this grass, and then they have to pay landscapers every month to cut the grass and trim the hedges. But people could be using that space to grow food.
Where your priorities are.
Right. It's a mindset thing, and we talked a bit earlier how in Bermuda we've had this tendency to stick our nose up and to feel like we're better. But we're not really a part of the Caribbean. We're better than those people in the Caribbean and things of that nature. And it's like, well, hold on. They seem to have a lot more infrastructure in place and be a lot more secure. We have the image of being this nice place, it's clean, it's pristine and things of that nature. But like, what's really going on underneath? And in recent years, the challenges that we've seen in government, right? The absence of finance to sustain certain things. Bermuda, like, we're seeing the reality of what we're actually facing because we've been unable to keep up the facade.
You think that facade is crumbling, the facade as you describe it?
Yeah, the facade is definitely crumbling now. We have potholes all over the roads. You see, the parks department is shrunk right down now because of austerity measures. And so you don't have the roadways being clean. Now, these are things that we took for granted before, that Bermuda was just this pristine, nice, clean. And as long as that image was kept up, we could remain proud and we could stick our chests out and feel like we were better than others, But what's really happened is that the community has fallen apart. We used to take care of this country together. And now everyone's going in and just dealing with themselves and leaving everything up to a government. It doesn't really work like that. We all have to be able to work together. We need to look out for our neighbors. We need to look out for our family and our friends. And we need to take care of our country together. If you want a clean country, then just stop dropping trash. But you have to be in a mindset where you feel a part of the community to even start to think that way. Otherwise, you're not going to have any. Why would you have any respect for something that you don't feel a part of?
But many people in this country care for the environment, clean water, plants, birds, whatever, as a white thing, and the black community isn't geared toward that.
Yeah, and again, that's part of kind of like the social structure in the island. Obviously, in the white community, you tend to have more affluency, which means people tend to have a lot more free time. And in that free time, people have the opportunity to explore, these kind of noble activities
And ideals.
and ideals. You see what I mean? Whereas in the black community, where people tend to be less fortunate and are more focused on a daily grind of making sure it's food on the table, working multiple jobs, and have far less time, right, to be involved with these kind of like noble pursuits. So that's where, but that becomes a misconception, because you can look at that and say, okay, well, more people in the white community are involved with these things, but that doesn't mean black people don't care. It's just that black people's focus tends to be, right, on different things based on circumstance.
And that daily grind, as you described it, has had an impact on us socially as well.
Oh, in a huge way, in a huge way. I mean, I remember my grandma, right, saying to all the women in my family, like, what's going on? Like, why are all of you going to work? This is crazy. What are you doing?
Right.
She couldn't understand that. As a person, like, my grandma didn't have a job. She helped out. My family had businesses, and my grandma would help out where she was always at home. She was always like the center. When I came home from school, my cousins and I, we all went to my grandma's house. So we always had like a safe haven, somewhere to go, someone who was looking out for us, taking care of us. You know what I mean? Come here, you boys. What you need? You need something to eat? You need some, And even if our parents ended up being busy or whatever, we were fine. We could sleep at grandma's house, everything. We always had somewhere to go. Those houses were like the center of our communities. People talk a lot about how, like, every day they would just get up and they'll be gone. And they're just out in the community all day. Nobody knows where they are, whatever. Nobody has cell phones. But they're safe. And what would be interesting, you get home and your parents would be like, oh yeah, I heard such and such, this and that. And you're like, how you know that? Because the word would get around, because we were connected and we communicated and we cared. So when you talk about like, how do we restore these things, we have to get back down to those basic principles of caring about ourselves, loving ourselves enough to love and care about others.
But the economic situation in this country where a studio apartment might be $1,500 a month dictate otherwise, don't they?
But that's the challenge.
Comes right back to finances.
Yeah, it comes down to finances. And that's one of the unfortunate things, is that finance has become a priority. And that priority has superseded, right, family and community. And so for many now who haven't had the opportunity to really experience strong family and strong community, the financial grind will be the only thing that they know. Now, obviously, if you don't have community and family, then you have to, because, otherwise, how do you take care of yourself?
Right.
But what happens when you have a strong community that's looking out for you, or a strong family, and you have that safety net, and you have that support, and you have people like who are imparting wisdom to you, or giving you like sound advice, or encouraging you, or uplifting you when you feel down? That's a whole different reality. Now we talk about nowadays like that our history is not being passed on, because who's having conversations? We actually have like now this aging community, but we have all these seniors homes. We didn't need seniors homes before, just like we didn't need daycares, because you had family. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So we thought that we were becoming more advanced.
Well, in truth and in fact,
we're going backwards.
Now I'm gonna play devil's advocate, and as we say in the Caribbean, chuck fire. You belong to a group called the Imperial Group.
Mm-hmm.
You guys promote unity in the community. Mm-hmm. I'm suggesting to you that that's a fallacy.
Okay. Well, just as there's a lot of segregation in the community, there is a lot of people who are actually working together. There are always people who are doing positive things in the community, and those are the types of initiatives that we support. Now, if we were to discuss whether the concept of unity has really taken root in a major way in the country, I would have to agree with you, which is why our organization exists and is why we're constantly promoting the concept of unity. We've become estranged with the idea, and because now our mindsets are so oriented around like being individual, then we've lost touch with the whole concept of working together. You know what I mean? And then so you got things like you're only as strong as your weakest link, which means now you have to exercise patience, because we might find ourselves very advanced, but we're working on a team, and there are others who still need to catch up a bit. So now we have to slow down, right, and help them, or forge ahead and leave them behind. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of inherent principles involved in a lot of the work that we used to do and the character that we used to show. And that's what gave us strength, which takes me back to the meeting I was telling you about with the teachers.
Right.
So I said to the teachers that we've become accustomed to making it easier for our children because we had challenges in life.
But isn't that everybody's goal, to make life better for their children, that they wouldn't have to suffer the difficulties that you and I would have had to suffer growing up?
The concept is brilliant.
But, I'm hearing a but, let me hear the but.
The reality though, right? Easy doesn't develop us, hard does. So in making things easier for subsequent generations, right, it put us then in a situation where then we say, well, where's the discipline? Where's the respect? Where's the work ethic?
Surely we can achieve making life easier by still and at the same time still instilling those qualities in our young people.
Well, those qualities came from the hardship. So this is the thing, right? So we developed capacity because we had it so hard, right? So if you take away the challenges, then there's nothing to push back at.
Yes.
You need some type of resistance. You need something to lean into to build you up. It's just like you could be at work and, work could be easy and everybody's kicked back. And then all of a sudden, whoo, something happens and it forces everyone to be jolted into action. And it could be a lot of people who say like, wow, I didn't even know I had that capacity before, because they were never challenged to rise to the occasion in that way, So rather than making life easier for our children, we should be challenging our children, recognizing that through challenging them, they develop. Now, we're not talking about abuse here. When you spoil children, right, they have a tendency to become rotten. So we're not trying to spoil children. We want children to grow. So give them something that challenges them, and they will grow. And then you'll get the outcomes that we're really looking for, right? A lot of times we look at our hard experiences as unfortunate experiences.
When in truth and in fact.
It's a blessing. We need to be thankful for the challenges that we meet in life, because it's those challenges that force us to grow. I wouldn't be the person I am today. You wouldn't be the person you are today without the challenges you had in life. Who do we remember when our education is all said and done? The teachers that made it easy, or the teachers that made it hard?
Definitely the ones that put me through the grinder. Definitely the ones that put me through the grinder.
You would probably struggle to remember the teachers that made it easy, because what difference did they make to your life? But the ones that were on your case, the ones that held you to account, that gave you no space to breathe, that were all over you, oh, you remember them.
Showed up at the house to bring you homework when you were sick and stayed home from school.
You're like, what? So, and then you appreciate all of that, right? Not in the moment, but later on. And that's the same thing with our children. Of course our children are not going to appreciate us making things difficult for them in the moment. But what are we there for? To be friends with our children? or to raise them. And if we are there to raise them, then
We have
let's
to
put our
allow
best
them-
foot. Yeah,
and
put
we
our
have to
best
allow
foot
them
forward.
to face some hardship and
Exactly. How are they going to be prepared to cope with life? You know what I mean? So I remember one time having a conversation with my parents, and you know, I think it was probably around after I graduated from university. And now you're starting to really get into like what's happening around the world. So I'm learning. Obviously, you know, I've traveled around the world now and met different people.
Yes.
And
Seen
you're
different
learning things.
cultures.
And I'm like, why you guys didn't tell me all this before? Like here I am thinking like everybody's just nice in the world
Yes.
and everybody
Yes.
cares about you and all of that. And I'm learning like it's people out there that's after us. Like I need to watch my back. Because there's people with blades looking to stab me in my back. Like, why didn't you tell me that? And I remember for a moment, I was upset. I quickly got over it because I realized that, you know, first of all, you know, I can't really fault my parents at all, right?
They did right by you.
You know what I mean? I have a whole lot to give thanks for from
Right.
my parents and my family in general, right? And I realized that my parents did the very best that they could, right, based on their understanding, their perspective, and things of that nature. I was moving into another realm of understanding. And some of the things my dad would follow me on and stuff like
Yes.
that, you know what I mean? But I'm another generation coming up. And we're building on the things that they have achieved.
And I've seen your dad. You had no choice but to do the right thing.
Just in look of a minute. Yeah. It's like, you know, you just start thinking this and say, nah, maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
You know, and I've got uncles, all the same size. So,
Right.
So yeah, I'm saying that this whole thing about, right, our ideas or our intentions versus reality is a real conversation. You know, and until we have real conversations about what's actually in the best interest versus what we think is in the best interest, then, you know, we're going to find ourselves challenged to achieve the things that we're looking to achieve. You know what I mean?
So instead of, as opposed to us thinking we're making life better, we're actually putting our young people at a disadvantage.
And very much so. We've put our young people at a disadvantage, you know.
I like telling a good story, and I always remember my son saying to me, playing football, and he's like, Daddy, I can't make the first team. Can you go talk to the coach? I was like, sure, I'll talk to the coach. So I went and I spoke to the coach. When I came back, he said, Daddy, you talked to the coach? I was like, yeah. He said, what the coach said? I said, well, he says, you know, prices are getting really high in Bermuda, and he's wondering how these kids are going to afford football boots. And so Daddy didn't talk to him about me making the first team. No, I didn't talk to him about you making the first team. If you want to make the first team, you train and you make the first team.
Yeah.
And that sparked something in him. And he has made the first team, captained almost every team he's ever played for. But again, it wasn't my job to make it easy for you. If you want something, you work for it, which is what my father taught me. Now, do we have a situation where we have young men who perhaps have not been taught that? So they don't know how to teach their young men and their daughters the very same thing, which has now led us to the situation that we're in. Do you subscribe to that?
Definitely. And so I was saying, like, the history is not being passed on. The principles, the morals are not necessarily being passed on. A lot of the things that our parents and our grandparents, right, possessed and had inherited, you know, because the communication is not there, because families are not as tight as they were before, it's not being passed on. So now you have children raising children. Or you have people who are raising children who haven't had the benefit of, right, I guess, strong family values and principles being passed on to them. And so they're left in a situation where they're just doing whatever they can without really knowing how to optimize on the development
Yes.
of their children. You know, and it's an unfortunate situation because it's led to just decline all across the country. all across the Western Hemisphere. It's not like Bermuda is really different.
Unique in that regard.
Unique in that regard. It's something that we really have to really address. And again, it's going back to the root. It's really understanding like the principles, the morals, the different character traits, the intangible things that gave us strength, and putting focus on reclaiming those things and moving forward like around those themes, and we can achieve a lot in life. It's not to say that, pursuing wealth or developing business, enterprise,
is a wrong thing.
All of that's a part of life. We should do that. But it's
you can't lose self.
Yes, yeah. So it's not that life is just about those things. It's so much broader.
Let me broach another subject with you. A few years ago, we had something called COVID that impacted this country as it did the rest of the world. You were one of the strongest voices speaking out against some of the policies that were being adopted, the having to quarantine and that type of thing, the use of the vaccines and different types of vaccines. How do you reflect on that now? Do you think you made the right decision by speaking out against the policies that were introduced at the time?
Very much so. And, hopefully most people can see clearly why that was necessary at the time. In the moment, it was difficult for people to see. People were very fearful. There was a lot of media out. There's a lot of messaging, telling people how they should be thinking. And because people were so afraid, fear paralyzes us, and so cognitive thought is kind of just leaves, because we're just kind of like paralyzed by the fear. And for the most part, we were paralyzed by the fear. And so we lost that capacity to really think rationally.
Do you not think that fear was well-founded, not knowing what this thing is and the impact we saw it having globally?
Well, the thing is this, right? And this is what we were talking about, principles, right? How do you deal with challenges? Well, it's our personal development that gives us the capacity to deal with challenges. Challenges come all through life, and COVID or the pandemic is just another challenge. Now, people could say, okay, this is huge, it's global scale. All right, but then life still has laws, there are principles, and there are guidelines, right? And the concerns I hear came from the fact that we seem to, right, not be adhering to fundamental principles. For example, right, it had been globally accepted that discrimination is something that is not of value to us, but all of a sudden it seemed permissible.
In terms of vaccinated and unvaccinated?
Yeah, it is all of a sudden now it was fine to discriminate, and then you watch the different institutions that were in place.
But was it discrimination or protection? Because it was felt if you didn't get the vaccine, you put yourself at risk and others at risk.
Should the leadership of the country and countries all around the world have been inviting different voices around the table, right? And across the board, there was agreement with the policies that were being put in place, then maybe there's a point in that. Now, when you have one narrative and all the energy is put into shutting down anyone who has any other thought or idea, now you really have a problem, because you're asking people to follow one train of thought. And there's no effort being made to include any other, right, viewpoints. And so the concerns around COVID were all really principle-based. They were really principle-based. If we would have, and going back to unity and working together, if I'm talking to doctors on the island and asking them what their views are, and then saying, okay, so has the government reached out to get any feedback from doctors? And then I'm being told, well, governments tend to just work with the people who share their view. And anyone who doesn't share their view is really excluded from the conversation. So I'm like, so why are politicians at the forefront of this if this is a health crisis?
Not medical professionals.
Why aren't medical professionals? And so all of a sudden you have people who, because they have titles in governments, they have now the authority to come out and speak to the public around subject matters, right, that they don't have skill and experience in, while people who have years and years of practical experience, skills, education, right, are being shut out. So naturally, I'm concerned. So just as a thinking person, I'm saying, okay, this doesn't feel rational, right? And now we're going against principle. For example, if you went to the Human Rights Department with a concern during COVID, then they would say, well, we don't have any jurisdiction over COVID.
But
Okay,
you have
so
jurisdiction over discrimination.
so I'm saying, okay, so human rights, I thought you were there to protect our rights. Well, in this situation, we don't really have a position. So that's what I'm saying. Like it gets really, really concerning because now even the institutions that's put in place to protect people and people's rights are now standing down to government authority over a pandemic. You know, and I'm saying, okay, so, you know, and then for me, for example, I've been, you know, I've lived a pretty healthy life dealing with natural health, holistic health. You know, I'm not someone who's really engaged in pharmaceuticals. So when people offer me pharmaceuticals, I say, well, you know, I don't really do drugs.
Legal or otherwise? Illegal.
Legal or otherwise. So, but then, you know, now like people are being pressured, and somebody like me is just totally excluded because all of a sudden it's being said that everything that I've practiced for my entire adult life is all of a sudden not valid. And I'm saying, well, that can't be the case. Like, how can that be the case? Because I'm not the only one who lives life like this. There are millions of people around the world who are very healthy and have lived like extremely successful lives, like, you know, adopting these basic principles and practices.
But do you not think that the outcome of this whole COVID experience here in Bermuda indicated that the authorities were right in the approach that they took in dealing with the pandemic locally?
At the end of the day, it's just made it clear that they were totally off base, you know, and unfortunately, the mandates did far more harm than good. I mean, we're still suffering.
What evidence you base that on?
Well, look at the deaths today. Why are so many people dying? I mean, I've had countless people in my family. I tell people, I don't have to go outside of my family that have all died with heart problems they never had before. And all of a sudden, it's been deaths due to cardiac arrest or different heart, just all heart-related issues. Where does that come from? I've yet to hear anybody answer it.
Where do you think it comes from?
Well, it's obviously because it became clear, and you know, the vaccine companies had to admit that there's a direct correlation between the COVID vaccines, right, and heart complications. And this is not just in Bermuda, it's all over the world. See, what you would hear on the news would be totally different from what's happening in reality. If you called the hospital in Bermuda, if you knew somebody who worked, right, in dealing with cardiovascular issues in the hospital in Bermuda, they were busier than you couldn't get routine checkups because they were so busy. Now, that never made the news. It just never made the news. So the censorship was a major concern, major censorship, right? I'm the chairman of the board for an environmental charity, right? I would call a press conference about, right, something to do with the environment,
yes,
and all the media would show up. I would write a press statement, something to do with the pandemic, and nobody would run it. Same person.
Why do you think that was?
Because of the censorship. Because anything that wasn't in alignment with the status quo narrative wasn't allowed. And even the media was afraid to challenge the government. Now, this is where you get into the realm of abuse of power. It becomes very unhealthy. But now the country is fearful of its own government. Government is meant to serve the people, and people are afraid of the government. So I would ask simple questions like,
Fear of the government, or practicing common sense?
Fear of the government. Because when you would have conversations with people, you would say, well, you see what's going on. And people would say, well, yeah, I know, I've had this experience, my neighbor, this has happened, this and that. Well, why aren't you saying anything? Oh, I've got a business, and, I don't want to mess with my work permits, or, I don't want my business to get shut down, or, I don't want to lose contracts, or, again, it came down to money and finance. Now, I'm in a situation where, as a business owner, and a social entrepreneur, that I'm not really beholden to anyone. So I don't have to worry about losing my job by speaking out. You know what I mean? So I recognize that I'm in a different, situation that most people find themselves in. But the number of people who called me or spoke to me privately about what was really going on, that were fearful of going public about that, I mean, it's a long list. That was just a constant, and it still goes on today.
It's almost as if you're equating the response to that situation, again, bringing it back to economics.
Yeah, it is, and it's unfortunate because, in the absence of having strong family and strong community, we've had to rely on finance. Because at the end of the day, the thought is that if we have money, then we can sort through any challenges that we face. You know what I mean?
You don't subscribe to that?
No, because that's a weak position. That's a position that leaves us beholden to others, that leaves us needy. Whereas when we build strength in our families and in our community, we have real resilience and strength, because you have people around you, you have a network that's supporting you. All this situation where you have people and it's oh, I have children and nobody to help and all that. The community used to solve all of that before, and the community can still solve that. And it's not beyond us to be able to get back to these things, but it's going to take some real work. It's going to take people moving and doing things because they appreciate that it's the right thing to do and the wise thing to do, right? Not just because it generates a dollar. You know what I mean? So in seeking a dollar, we find ourselves lost. We've weakened ourselves. We've eroded all the structures, the organizations, the principles, the corner stores, the grocery stores, the convenience stores, the carpentry shops, the plumbing businesses, the masonry business, all of these things that we had in our own community. We sacrificed in the pursuit of money, and now we're finding ourselves chasing a dollar rather than building off of our collective strength.
Doesn't all go well.
Yeah. And when we reflect on it now, we can see it because, like I said, we have all these senior homes now. We have all these daycares around. Why didn't we need those things before? What was the difference? The difference was family and community.
How do we get back there? To end this interview, how do we get back to that position where we put the community first, we put family first in a world where economic need is ever increasing?
We've got to be willing to have some real tough conversations. And it's going to take real leadership to get us there, because people are going to have to be prepared to set the examples. It's going to be very difficult for us to just expect everyone to just switch up right away. People are going to have to see it being modeled. So the question becomes, who has the capacity to stand up, and who with the capacity is willing to do so and to set the example and start to do right by family and do right by the community, you know, and start to work like more from the heart than with a focus on like financial gain. Because what we can achieve collectively far exceeds what we'll ever achieve individually. And the sacrifice always comes before the reward. You know? So if we, right, understand these principles, right, and these are the people I'm speaking to, right? If you really understand these principles, then it's your responsibility, just like it's my responsibility, to live up to these things and set the example in a way that other people see the wisdom in the behavior that's being modeled, and people will follow suit.
Eugene, thank you very much. And these are the very principles that we're hoping to address here on the State of the Nation with Dr. Stanley James. Highlight the issues, address the issues, and hopefully arrive at solutions that will benefit us collectively and not individually or for a financial gain.